Okay, should be live. Looks like excellent connection, and hopefully we'll give it some time for people to filter in. I realize it's later than usual. As I've stated before, it's just been a crazy year, but I have needed to just dedicate more time to my family. I did just go and see the new Top Gun movie with my wife. That was a good time. It's the first movie I've been to in theaters since before 2020. It's pretty wild. I highly recommend seeing that movie, by the way. It is a great film. It was a good one to see in theaters, too. And it's kind of relevant to our discussion tonight, because our discussion tonight is going to be a little bit on black projects and just the classifying of physics and aerospace technology. But that is a relevant topic in that movie, but not to the same degree that we're going to discuss it tonight, but a little bit. It was weird to see a movie in theaters, and that does bring up another topic that I kind of might touch on just because it's on my mind, but not because it's really relevant. But I will be touching on it later in a full breakdown video, because it's a topic that I'm extremely knowledgeable on and experienced on, which is kind of like arms and the Second Amendment. And what I've seen is right before I got on here, I was Google searching Eric Weinstein, because this video is about a discussion between him and Hal Puthoff, and a tweet by him came up about regulating nukes, which is like handheld nukes, and like AR-15s, the same, basically. And he didn't exactly say it. He just said, if you can regulate one of these, why can't you regulate the other? Essentially. And this is an interesting idea, because before in the past, I tried to ask myself, where is the line? Like, if there is a line, then where is the line? And the line that I kind of ended on was a real line. It wasn't a line that I wanted or anything like that. It was a line that could be drawn physically, which would be like remote control. But he posted a picture of the Davy Crockett. The Davy Crockett, which is a great argument, honestly, like, to be quite honest. The Davy Crockett was like is a little mortar, basically, that was handheld by one troop, one or two troops, and it was like a handheld nuke, basically, and like it was a mortar. It launched a nuke, a little mini nuke, and this doesn't use remote control. It's the only nuke I can think of that doesn't really require like remote control of some type. I understand timed devices and stuff like that in the past, but like time devices I would even consider kind of similar, as like if you need to use a mechanism to delay the use or in some way, then I would say that's drawing a line. But we're going to get more into that another day. It is on my mind just because I had seen that. And as many of you know, I have a history working in the Second Amendment community professionally, and also personally very familiar with just self-defense and also self-defense rights in general. It's a video that has been delayed discussing arms technologies already, because I can't show weapons in my hands live on a live YouTube channel broadcast. Like, I can upload a video that shows them, but I can't hold an AR-15 on a live video. But I could mount it on the wall, but I can't hold it live. So it does delay the video a bit, because it means that I have to do something that requires a bunch of editing. But we'll delay that for another one. But today we're going to talk about the discussion between Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein, and it is on this YouTube channel, which is Jesse Michels' YouTube channel. Highly recommend subscribing. He's done a lot of interesting conversations, and while I haven't gotten too deep into a lot of them, it seems like he's very bold and brave in the conversations that he has, and I appreciate that. Not that he has a ton to lose. I don't really know his background, but he's not Javi Loeb. But if you're gonna have conversations with Alex Jones and stuff like that, that's some bold stuff. I appreciate that. But the discussion that we're gonna be discussing is this one, and it is about the physics of UFOs, and it is between Eric Weinstein and Hal Puthoff. Now, Eric Weinstein doesn't need that much of an introduction to anybody who has, followed this channel, but just in case you have not, Eric Weinstein, PhD in mathematical physics, Harvard University, creator of geometric unity, which is a unified physics model that has been proposed. MIT, Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So basically, math and physics expert, geometry, things like that. Main reason why he keeps coming up is because of his introduction of geometric unity, which is his unified physics model. Hal Puthoff also fascinating character, is an American parapsychologist and engineer, according to this. I would say he's borderline physicist. He co-founded the To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge, who was the lead guitarist in Blink-182. And To the Stars Academy is his basically organization that is trying to bring the scientific and governmental evidence of UFOs and UAPs to the world, even though it says it's, the border of art and science, and, it's some people have accused it of being a CIA plant, basically, because it's filled with a bunch of people from the CIA. But he's fascinating. PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford. He worked with lasers and electron beam devices, and he also led the what was the name of the projects? It was here it is, Project Stargate. And Project Stargate was a project by the CIA to look at remote viewing, and it was turned into a movie. Well, they made a movie about it called The Men Who Stare at Goats. Right here. This is Project Stargate, 1978, and worked on remote viewing. Was terminated and declassified in 1995 after the CIA report concluded that it was never useful in any intelligence operation. I've heard that is BS. Then it was created into they made a book and then a movie about it called The Men Who Stare at Goats. The movie was starring George Clooney, and I've seen part of it, but I was too young to really appreciate it when I first watched it. I will probably watch it again. But kind of fringe science. And I hate that word, fringe science because it well, I don't hate it, but it implies it's almost the same thing as like pseudoscience, which I actually don't believe exists. The only pseudoscience that exists is fake. It would be like psyop science, which we're going to talk about in this. Like scientific endeavors that are known, that would be known to go nowhere before they're even started. And they're just meant to look like scientific endeavors, but they might not be. Also, one fascinating thing that I have noticed is that the let's see here real quick. Let's see. Okay. The UFO hashtag on YouTube is restricted and is not allowed to show up. If I put it in my description, it vanishes and does not work, which is weird because it allows UAP but not UFO. This implies something weird is going on. Now, it could be just that someone at YouTube was like, UFO seems to bring up a bunch of nonsense and we don't want a bunch of people looking at a bunch of nonsense, what they would deem as nonsense, and they just blocked it, and it's just not been unblocked. But it also could be that there are government institutions that are collaborating on this and only allowing us to see UAP hashtag content. But I think that what is the reason for this, if anything, if it is in fact done with purpose, that is not just some censorious fool at YouTube who just wants to censor us looking at things that they deem as pseudoscience, would be because things that are labeled as UAP would be linked to what the government is releasing now, and things with the hashtag of UFO would be linked to content that is focused on government cover-ups of the past. And so that makes a lot of sense, actually. And because I didn't understand this, it's like, why allow UAP but not UFO hashtags? And unless you're not just trying to keep people away from things involving flying saucers or whatever these things are, but you want to keep people from looking at things that are against the government's current narrative. Or you want to keep people looking at things that are the government's current narrative. Like, everything in the news is going to be using UAP. Not everything, but anything that uses UAP is going to be recent, because it's a recent word. And, they say, we changed it to UAP to stop the stigma. I don't know how true that is. It might be true to some degree, but it's not the whole story. There's definitely at least a usefulness that has probably been found in their ability to track content online and steer us to it. And I can tell this because I've watched the majority of Richard Dolan's YouTube videos. And if I search Richard Dolan Area 51, it doesn't come up on YouTube, his actual video about Area 51. It's just blocked, and I have to go searching for it chronologically on his page. You can test it out and see, but it won't come up, most likely at least, because it doesn't come up for me, and it never really has. I have to find it, like I said, by looking through his videos chronologically. That's wild. I mean, the more you think about it, why censor that unless you're in cahoots with the government? You'd have to be. And because there's so much content on Area 51, and for whatever comes up to be what comes up, we're going to test it right now, is not the most highly watched or the most relevant. So Area 51. Area 51. The number one video has 144,000 views. It's just some girl saying the best of Area 51 Las Vegas. And it's a bar, I'm pretty sure. Do you see this? Area 51 Las Vegas. 35,000 views. Why? Because they're screwing with us. Obviously. So if you're gonna doubt that this is actually happening, you should stop doubting that now, because this is legitimate censorship and steering, I'll call it, if anything. You know, it's steering. That's the end of the UFO or the Area 51 content. It's like the History Channel and some bars. That's crazy. There's so much content on YouTube about Area 51. Documentaries and talks and discussions with ufologists and historians about aerospace historians, and it's all blocked. By the way, if you don't want this to be blocked, please hit the like button and comment down below and share it, what you think of the stream, just because it does boost us in the algorithm for the time being that we are here. But they are definitely trying to control the information that we are looking at. And, you know, we have on this channel, we have a short-term plan and a long-term plan as far as how to deal with this, this level of steering. And then also after steering, you get censorship. Steering is like, it's a word I just, you know, use for it. But it's when you want people to look at Area 51 bar instead of Area 51, you know, classified military base in Nevada. So, like I said, please hit the like button if you find this interesting. But now we're going to get into this discussion with Eric Weinstein and Hal Puthoff. And it is about the censorship of physics technologies, essentially, and what does the government know? And I just, like I said at the beginning of the stream, I just watched the Top Gun movie with my wife right before getting on the stream, and it's Area 51 is in that movie in the very beginning. Maverick, the main character, is basically been banished to Area 51, and if you could call that being banished, to work on a super top secret project called Dark Star, which is more or less it's more or less the Aurora spy plane, which is the rumored Mach 6 plus spy plane that was being tested at Area 51 in the 90s and was tracked by seismometers across California, and you know, they would track how long it took to flip each seismometer as it would take off in Nevada, fly down across California, turn around and go back. And they would get the speed by tracking that, and it was like Mach 6 or something like that. But in this movie that just came out, it goes like Mach 10. And it's a very, very cool scene. But the plane is, you know, modeled after the SR-72, which is a new supposedly unmanned version of basically whatever the Aurora was that still has not been declassified. And but there's an enormous amount of evidence for it. But this, what's interesting about this is that today you'll hear aerospace officials say things like, oh, well, in 2030, we hope to have the SR-72 operational, but it's not operational yet. And it's like, if the SR-72 is going to be real, we basically already had a manned version of it. If the Aurora actually existed, which there's an abundance of evidence that it existed. It was first evidence was seen when they declassified a document about spy planes that had the U-2's budget and the SR-71's budget, and then something called the Aurora's budget. And then they just claimed that it was the B-2 bomber when it was classified, but which may be the case, but probably isn't. Otherwise, why list it there? But the fact of the matter is that something, according to seismometers that were, the data was public, something was taking off in the Nevada desert and flying at like Mach 6 or something like that across California. And now they're saying that they're hoping to get the technology, ready and implemented by 2030. And it's like, this has been around, if that's the case, for 40 years. 40 years. And so this, obviously the government, particularly aerospace companies, have a history of classifying information for decades. But one thing that everybody wants to really know is not whether or not hypersonic technology has been declassified or is operational in classified, programs or whatever. It's, do they have anti-gravity? Because according to Bob Lazar, they had anti-gravity craft that were recovered from another civilization, and I do believe him. We're operating under the assumption that he is telling the truth, that he worked on at Area S4, and they couldn't figure out how it worked very well. And a little bit, there's old videos of him describing more in-depth physics of it, and it is interesting. We'll look over it at some point. But more or less couldn't figure out a lot of this. But then there's rumors of things like the TR-3B, and which is like a nuclear-powered anti-gravity plane, apparently. And supposedly that exists. And so the question is, did the government classify anti-gravity technology after it came out, and did they hush it under the table? And as I've stated before, there was Professor Ning Li, who had made some anti-gravity breakthroughs, and it was peer-reviewed and everything like that. Not that that matters much, but and the government offered her a huge contract, and I think this was in the 90s, and then she just went dark, and I think she's dead now. But her company, I believe, existed until very recently, if it doesn't still exist, and her research was just classified, it appears. But they said the research went nowhere. So it's like, if it went nowhere, then why give her a grant? Why did she go underground, basically? Like, why did nobody hear from her after this huge announcement in the physics world that just creates all this buzz? And this seems to be the pattern with anti-gravity. But, and I've said here before my theories as to why this particular technology is worth more than most. And it just has to do, I think, with the fact that it opens up Pandora's entanglement box and for entanglement technologies. And it's not just about anti-gravity. And Stephen Greer has said similar things like this, that they're not worried about anti-gravity getting out. They're worried about all the technologies that you could derive from that, including mental manipulation and all kinds of things like that. Like, we're taking him at his word, but I realize, but that makes a lot of sense to me. But this conversation, onto this one. So, a lot of creepy things about this anti-gravity stuff in physics. So here's the first clip.
Were there actually updates in physics, maybe mid-century, that were not disclosed to the public?
Another puzzle we would love to have cleared up is an understanding of the role of aerospace companies as holders of potentially basic scientific knowledge not shared with the academic world. Is it possible? Seems very wrong to me.
Maybe wrong, but it's true.
It is true. You believe it's true.
Yeah, I know it's true.
You know that there's physics knowledge held by aerospace companies that is not
There
known.
certainly is materials knowledge,
Materials, well, okay, materials
which
science.
involves topological physics or whatever.
Okay. But fundamental physics as opposed to, condensed matter or
Right. Certainly aerospace corporations have knowledge in the UAP area that specifically are sequestered against FOIA
oh,
because of proprietary
I appreciate that.
labels, which the whole thing was set up to be that way on purpose.
right. But the idea that there would be fundamental physics knowledge that would be housed in an aerospace company and not shared with the physics community, there is no evidence of that.
No evidence for it, not that I know of.
And I wouldn't
That doesn't mean it's not the case, but
That would be this crazy egregious.
it would change our entire concept of who we are if somebody kept fundamental physics secret in the years since we became capable of exploding fusion devices.
Right.
I would grab a pitchfork and a tiki torch, and I would march on the National Science Foundation.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, I still can't believe that that's true.
it would only be if it were the case that in fact we have mastered anti-gravity and they're being built by aerospace corporations, then new physics would have to be involved.
Is what is called the golden age of general relativity tied to these topics? That is, there was this bizarre surge of activity in general relativity between, I would say the time of Einstein in the 50s or something like that. There wasn't a ton of development in GR, and then suddenly there was this explosion. There was a
Well, this explosion, there's a famous series came out in Miami Herald and other newspapers in probably the 50s. The author was Talbert, and he did a series where he found out that a number of aerospace engineering companies were suddenly interested in anti-gravity, and that people like DeWitt on up and down, really top level physicists, were suddenly getting grants to look at the idea of anti-gravity. For example, the gravity essay came
this
along.
from the Gravity Research
Gravity
Foundation
Research
in
Foundation,
Boston.
right. And so it looked like it was going to be a big explosion. But anyway, then it all sort of quieted down. And I could take two implications of that, and that is it quieted down because nobody ever got anywhere. Or it quieted it down because they did get somewhere and it went black.
So why march on the National Science Foundation? That I don't understand, because it's not I don't think it's the National Science Foundation that's responsible for any cover up that may be happening. But regardless,
My understanding is that there were really twin loci of activity, one of which surrounds a Gravity Research Foundation in New Boston, New Hampshire, and I guess that was the work of Babson. And the story is sort of not really very plausible, that his sister had drowned in a pond or something to that effect, and so he had gravity as his sworn enemy. You know this story?
No, I had not heard it.
Oh, yeah. So Babson contacted Lewis Whitten, who was coming out of Johns Hopkins, and then oddly, the similarly named individual named Bainson, with some sort of tobacco or air conditioning fortune, reaches out to Bryce DeWitt and asks whether he will found an institute at the University of North Carolina,
Yes,
Chapel
right.
Hill,
Right.
for the study of physical fields,
And particularly focusing on gravity.
particularly focused on gravity. Now, somehow DeWitt has the courage to answer this essay contest in the other silo and destigmatizes it. So there was money to be had.
so interestingly, there was lots of stuff going on with anti-gravity. But what's even more fascinating is Ed Witten is the currently considered by many people in physics and math to be the preeminent, physicist in the world right now, and he has been pushing string theory, and he's a geometric physicist. I would imagine that's how you would describe
was an
him.
early pioneer
But
at the time of the Wright brothers.
his
That the Glenn Martin Company becomes Martin Marietta, later becomes Lockheed Martin.
Okay.
So
So basically, according to this clip that just was aired, and the story that was told by Eric Weinstein, Ed Witten's father was one of the preeminent anti-gravity researchers in the world. And then all of a sudden, he gets very involved and everything goes dark, and then Ed Witten basically leads everybody down string theory. But here you go. Let's continue.
Martin is coming all the way through. Was employing, I believe, Lewis Witten, Edward Witten's father, to do anti-gravity research, somehow tied up with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and the Johns
Very interesting.
Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. So there's something about aerospace in the 1950s and sort of post-Manhattan Project era that's pretty potent. And we're confused by this. Why was Solomon Lefschetz, the great topologist, recruited to be involved with Lewis Witten and to have an entire nonlinear group working on mathematics that then gets moved to Brown University when I believe that these programs are sunsetted, so they get spun off back into the academic ecosystem? I don't know what any of this is.
So you have top physicists working on
Because
crazy stuff,
most
anti-gravity.
physicists don't know this story,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, I knew it because it was weird. It stood out. The Lewis Witten, Edward Witten story has never been fully made sense of. The world's most brilliant physics mind of our time is the son of the country's most prominent and important anti-gravity researcher of the 1950s.
What?
Do you think that string theory, which Ed Witten worked on, is intentionally a bridge to nowhere?
I have privately said to you that string theory was a very odd development because it both allowed physics to proceed as if it was doing something new while breaking no new ground in the physical world in which we live. I don't really know. If you were trying to stagnate the field, string theory is pretty brilliant.
Okay, so this is related to something that I discussed in a recent stream. And I did a stream recently called UFOs versus Wasps, I think. And people seem to be a huge fan of that stream, which is pretty funny because I did that stream because I had actually failed to have a commentary to give on a conversation. And I was like, whatever, we'll just talk about UFOs and my theories on them. And people loved it. But one of the theories that I revealed in that is that I'm pretty sure that if these things exist, that they are messing with our technological development. And the reason for this was because technology grows exponentially. And if you look at our technological development, you get exponential growth up until right after the nuclear era, basically. So you get the hydrogen bomb and nothing after, really, in the physical, in the physical technological development, basically. So we haven't had any faster planes since the 60s. We haven't had any serious breakthroughs in material sciences. Every single year they promise us, carbon nanotubes and fusion, and every single year we don't get carbon nanotubes and we don't get fusion. And I understand some of these things take time, but the point is that exponential growth should be the trend technologically. It should be, and it's not. It seems like we were going like this, and then it just stopped here, and then just leveled out. And instead of, or it's like the graph did something like this here. Let's see here. You insert. Here we go. Shapes. This is how it should have been. I don't know why that's upside down, but here we go. So this is how technology should move, like this. And it's not. It's not what happened. What happened was something more like this. Then, if we just go one more time, kind of like that. It's basically what happened. Okay, this is how it should have looked. Technology. Let's say you've got, I don't know, farming here, fire here, metalworking here, and then you've got, I don't know, like fossil fuels. And then you've got nuclear power. And then maybe should have been here. Entanglement tech, or entanglement, manipulation. Okay? This is how it should have looked, essentially. And it did not. It stopped here for some reason. Something cut off right there. And instead, more or less just continued this way, horizontally. We should have hit that. But really, when you really look at this, it's much more spread out. So farming would be here, and fire would be like here, and metal would be like here. Fossil fuels would be like here. And each one is, you've got time, okay? Time periods. I realize this is so sloppy, but I could do this really cleanly as well, but I'm not. This is just for the sake of Okay. There. So this is time, and it should be a decreasing amount of time that is associated between each of these jumps. So if there's like 2 between here, or let's say even like 3, because this thing moved, essentially. There you go. And then you've got metal. Fossil fuels would be maybe here. And I understand we're not counting fire, like wood. And then nuclear power, and then entanglement. And there should be like no gap between these two, and there wouldn't be. There'd be a biggest gap between these two, next biggest gap would be here, then the next biggest gap would be here, then the next biggest gap would be here, and then there'd be no gap here, basically. There'd be like 10 years between nuclear power and entanglement. And we should have basically had anti-gravity in like the 50s or 40s. Not the 50s or 40s. In, I would say probably like the 70s. Because 1952 was the nuclear, was the hydrogen bomb. The atomic bomb was in the 1940s, I believe. We dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, but as you can see there, what I mean, basically. Something is up. And it looks like someone is screwing with us. Now, I don't know if it is just the government or if it is just these beings responsible for the UAPs or both. But something happened between these two. Okay? This doesn't make sense. We should be here. Instead, we had something like this happen. Where instead, this kind of thing. And what we got was instead we got basically computers, internet, blockchain. That looks pretty good, actually. But people have asked me a lot, like, do I think that there's a technological cap? And yeah, definitely. Like, people who say things like, what if a civilization is 1,000 years ahead of us? What if they're a million years ahead of us? That's nonsense. Like, within the next 300 years, we will hit technological cap. I almost would bet everything on it. I probably would bet everything on within 400 years, but I honestly think it will be within 100 years. But it could be less, could be 40 years, could be 400 years, but it's not going to be more than that. It'd probably be less than 200 years. We'll hit every single technology. And that doesn't mean you can't iterate, but you can't innovate anymore. You can make an iPhone from, a Nokia brick phone, but that's an innovation. But then going after that from the iPhone, 3G to the iPhone, what is it on now, 13? Like, that's just iteration. It doesn't do anything fundamentally different. It's just better, but it doesn't do anything new. That is what will happen after you reach that point of exponential technological development. Is like you hit the wall, and this, you can see mathematical trends in the development of technology, and you can tell when things are not organically developing. They're not organically developing. And it is weird that Ed Witten is the son of the preeminent, anti-gravity researcher, from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, whatever it was. And now he's the preeminent string theorist, which has led to nothing. I'm not saying he's in on this consciously. The CIA has assets that don't know they're assets, as people talk about all the time. Well, I guarantee you that these beings have assets that don't know that they're assets, and it's much more effective than when the CIA does it, because those eventually get out, or at least you'd think. You typed Area 51, not Area 15, not Area 51. Did I? Dang. Well, still, it should correct. I'm maintaining that was BS. I'm gonna try it again, just to prove a point. Okay. Yeah. More. It's better, but still. Area 51, that's got 7 million views. That's pretty good. But then, once again, you just get nonsense. Not all of this is nonsense. This is much better than Area 15. Wow, that was actually a pretty big mistake. But still, it's not what you would expect. And I'm telling you, if I type this in, watch this, just for the point. Area 51. Okay. I type Area 51 Dolan. There's no video by Richard Dolan about Area 51. They're trying to hide whatever he's doing for some reason, or somehow. I'm not saying it's specifically targeted at him, saying that something he's doing is getting flagged. But once again, it's like, this is what they want you to see. It's like there's sanctioned stuff and there isn't sanctioned stuff. So that is my bad on when I typed Area 15. That's I claim dyslexia, but I've never been diagnosed by it or with it. Maybe aliens, if they exist, are the ones telling the elites that there are too many people and everything will end in disaster. Could be. Or maybe we're just Eloys and only our better get fly around at warp speeds. Okay. Well, it does seem biological things max out, so only go in so many directions. So, next clip is a bit relevant to some of that. So, the point is this, though. Something screwing with us should be here. We ain't. That's my point. And I do think this is part of God's plan, but I don't think that it means someone's not screwing with us. That could be part of God's plan. But this next clip is about gravity being weak.
Defeating an entire planet. The weakness of gravity. Is done, we will get up from these couches, defeating an entire planet. The weakness of gravity is one of the great mysteries of our lives. It's inconceivably weak.
True enough. Yeah.
And if we accept Einstein's general relativity, again, I'm not quite sure how much of it you take issue with. It would seem that we're either prisoners here, or that we have to lean so heavily on time dilation, or we would have to amass levels of energy. I mean, your point is,
Yeah, we
GR
can't do it from what we know, for sure.
Okay, so then the idea is
He's talking about faster than light travel.
In GR.
Yeah, something is at least missing.
Okay.
And maybe GR is okay as it goes, but we're missing something that would have the effect of manipulating the variables in there that we can't do with any reasonable engineering approach.
Well, so far as I know, there's only one analog that even smelled vaguely like this in electromagnetism. Aronoff and Bohm argued that if you passed an electron beam around a solenoid
Yep.
and passed a current through it, if it was perfectly insulated, you would have no E and B fields out, that is electric and magnetic fields, outside of the solenoid, but yet you'd get a phase shift in the
Yep.
electron beam as it circled. This is what's known as a holonomy effect.
You guys talk about this incredible experiment called the Bohm-Aronoff effect. Can you show me the actual experiment?
Imagine you have some sort of an electron gun, and you have a beam of electrons, and they hit a first mirror so that they bounce off of that mirror. You have a next mirror in the form of a diamond, and I'm looking down on my tabletop experiment, and I've got some sort of a detector over here. If I have a wire here, it's heavily, heavily insulated. I can imagine running a current through this wire, the solenoid in the center, and the E and B fields would be dead equal to zero because of the insulator. However, when I pass current through this wire, mysteriously the detector picks up different patterns of self-interference of the phase of the electron function.
Okay, so this becomes kind of relevant later because when we look at Hal Puthoff in this, who ran the Stargate program for the CIA, involved with remote viewing, they did basically what I kind of am conceiving as something similar to this, where they wanted to test his ability to increase or decrease temperatures in different parts of the room just by using his mind, and they basically put a detector in the other room. They insulated it as best they could. They didn't let him see it, nothing like that, and then they had him go and try and influence it, and he was able to influence it according to Hal Puthoff every single time. And we're going to look at that clip in a minute, but here. Right here. This has lots of implications on physics.
Remote viewing program that I set up at SRI. I was asked to check out claims of Ingo Swann. Ingo had done experiments at City College in New York under Professor Gertrude Schmeidler. She had set up thermistors, and from across the room, he could make the temperatures go up and down. And so I took this claimed psychic, invite him out to SRI to see what he could do. We had the quark detector, and so it was basically a quantum chip inside of mu metal magnetic shielding, inside of steel dewar for electrical shielding, inside of superconducting shielding, the requirement being that nothing could affect this thing from the outside. So I want to see if you can affect it. He affected it unequivocally 100%. You had this slow oscillation. What he did was he stopped the oscillation. Now what turned out to be even more, quote, magical was when we asked him, how'd you know what to do? And he said, well, all I did was look inside, and then he drew out how things were related inside that had never been published, and it turned out that they were accurate. And so it was when I wrote all that up and circulated around, that's when the CIA came knocking at my doorstep. And they said, "Oh, we've been looking for you." And I said, "Why? What'd I do?" He said, "Well, the Russians have been spending millions of dollars at their best institutes with their best people for years. No scientists in America even believe there's such a thing as psychokinesis or ESP or whatever. And you happen to do this experiment." And so, we graduated from there to having remote viewing of super secret facilities, projectiles, hidden in safes. That's how the whole program got started. It ended up being a $20 million program.
I don't know what to make of all of this. I don't think any of this, to me, sounds real. Now, that said, you could imagine a one-time backwards upgrade saying, we happen to know about aliens for a long period. We've kept it secret. We've figured out the physics. The physics has different fields. We're actually able to use this. We call it psychic phenomenon, so we don't have to give our secrets away. You could imagine a complete reworking of reality. Without that real working of reality, I would say this is BS.
What would be your bet?
Okay, here's the thing. $20 million and 20-year program. The $20 million, the government spends $20 million on like lampshades and all kinds of random stuff. But 20 years is not dedicated to something that shows no promise. It's not. And also, Hal Puthoff maintained security clearances and was an advisor on the Pentagon's UAP program. If he was looking into complete nonsense that was just like constantly being debunked, and the CIA was like, okay, you've claimed this, we're going to look into it, and then it turned out to be nonsense, you don't get to keep doing that. I mean, maybe if you're a politician, sure. But if you're somebody who's brought in as a consultant, no. Consultants have to produce results to some degree. Now, I realize the government, is the government, and like it has its just its favoritism and all kinds of things that impact its contracts and things like that. Of course it does. But this is too weird. Like, you either do something with this if it's going to be studied for 20 years or you don't. And I think what happened to me at the urinal in the men's bathroom one time. Search results. I don't know what happened to you in the urinal at the men's bathroom. That is out of context. I went too far ahead, I'm guessing. Maybe you can elaborate in the chat. Wow, that's amazing. By how much? I don't know. But this is pretty fascinating, and it makes sense, though, that this would be the case. There's been all kinds of experiments that have been done throughout, decades to see whether or not our minds influence the outcome of the experiment. And the reality is that this has been true in every single experiment. It's just whether or not we can perceive the results as being influenced by our minds. And, people talk about like the double slit experiment and things like that. And I think that is even pretty misunderstood. And even by me, early on, I think, and maybe now, but probably understand it quite a bit more now than I did previously. But when Eric Weinstein's talking about gravity earlier, and like how we can defeat, why is it's a mystery that it's so weak. It's like it's so strong that it can make stars explode, but it is so and create black holes that suck everything up in their path. But then it's so weak that we can defeat it just by standing up, And I can tell you that I don't feel the gravitational force of the Earth very consciously, and there's reasons for that because you're always feeling it. So why would you perceive it when it's that? You wouldn't perceive it unless you're taking like high G's or something, in which case that is kind of gravity. When you understand what gravity is, that's kind of what gravity is, even though people would think that that's manufactured because you're its inertia and stuff like that. But it's not exactly that. It's related. But then I look at these neodymium magnets that I was building with this weekend, and those things are dangerously strong. Like, they are ridiculously strong, to the point where if I let two of them go, they smash together so fast and so hard that they explode and destroy themselves into, in some puff of sparks and stuff. It was wild. It freaks my wife out to have those things near us. But gravity seems much weaker than that, but it's also much stronger than that. And I think that and I realize, like, if you're new to Sentient Singularity Theory, this is going to seem like nonsense, but I think that this is related to the fact that it is a conscious action by the universe, and it's different than magnetism. It's like there's an element of choice happening here, which would also influence whether or not you got different results from the same experiment and run different times. So when people say, oh, we were never able to recreate the results of the anti-gravity research, this is a very common claim. And it's like, well, maybe that's because there's more going on than just whether or not the experiment is set up a certain way. Maybe it has to do with the intentions of the experimenter, or of the universe itself, or of some, technologically advanced civilization that's watching us. And that sounds like craziness, but you're also watching a stream about UFOs, and the government has, admitted to the existence of these things, and now we're watching Hal Puthoff tell us that they had psychic spies, which they did, and they've admitted to. Whether or not they were effective is the next question, but according to him, they were, and according to looking at how much they invested in the program and how time-wise, it seems like they definitely were. But that doesn't mean you'd be able to recreate the experiments again, especially if it's about gravity and remote viewing and things like that. It's like there's something about this level of tech, which is like entanglement level technology, that is related so much to the act of participation with the universe, and it's a participatory action, and that is why it's not going to have the same result every time necessarily. It's a theory, at least, and I think it's probably accurate. But and it follows with that comes from my cosmology. It's not that just comes out of nowhere, and I'm just trying to explain away like anomalies and errors. It seems it is suggested in Sentient Singularity's cosmology that gravity would be a conscious action. Like, if you were God, you had to manipulate things, you would do it in two ways. You would do it through force, and you would do it through matter, which is really, both of these are energy. But matter, you would have like your hands, and you would also have, some ability to just animate things forward. And I've talked about this before. Quarks are kind of like two fingers and a thumb. When you're looking at hadrons, it's like two up quarks and a down quark for a proton, two down quarks and an up quark. It's like two fingers and a thumb for a right hand and left hand. And then you would also be animating things with gravity. Gravity is the force that kickstarts all of creation within the universe, at least. Because how are different elements created, other than hydrogen and I think even maybe helium, that would have been created at the beginning of the universe? You're just getting all these elements from, gravity squeezing matter together to create stars, and then those stars exploding and to create heavier elements. And like those elements are then used in life. Well, what we call life. I think life is much more than just cellular life. But and so it's clear that like this animating energy of the universe is gravity. It has to be. And that's not even just like a guess. So the question is it a conscious action by the universe or not? I would claim that it is. Which, if that's the case, then experiments and the results and the consistency of the results of the experiments would be subject slightly to, choice, not by you necessarily. The thing that Weinstein drew on the board was the I think Bohm-Aronoff experiment about had to do with detection of influencing electrical currents. I'm pretty sure is how you would explain it. Let me look it up. Bohm-Aronoff experiment. But basically, it shouldn't have had an effect. But it did.
That psychic phenomenon, so we don't have to give our secrets away. You could imagine a complete reworking of reality. Without that real working,
I had a superconducting shielding, the requirement being that nothing could affect this thing from the outside. So I want to see if you can affect it.
Let's just look, though, this at this.
It had the quark detector, and so it was basically a quantum chip inside a new metal magnetic shielding, inside of steel dewar for electrical shielding, inside of superconducting shielding, the requirement being that nothing could affect this thing from the outside. So I want to see if you can affect it. He affected it unequivocally 100%. You had this slow oscillation. What he did was he stopped the oscillation. Now what turned out to be even more.
Okay, so that experiment, though, that he was talking about, let's just look. I'll find it, but here. To get into this. Okay. We're jumping around a bit while I look for it, but this is the next clip. It's about things being a psyop.
be particularly compatible. In other words, it appears that there's nothing to see,
Yeah.
and we're telling the truth now, or we're telling the truth then that there's nothing to see, and we're lying now that UFOs are here.
What I find really interesting about the Blue Book history is Edward J. Ruppelt was sort of running Blue Book. He was an Air Force general. And he seemed pretty open-minded to the phenomena being real, especially after kind of empirical inquiry. And then in 1952, something very bizarre happened, which is there were a bunch of spottings, of UFO spottings, around Washington, D.C. in July 1952. And then there's a Caltech physicist named H.P. Robertson who forms kind of a panel. And the conclusion of the panel is basically the government needs to systematically downplay the importance of the phenomena. And if the public were to know the truth, it would touch off mass hysteria. Every single head of Blue Book from that point forward, from 52 to 69 when it ended, became progressively more kind of anti-UFO. And so the question is this, typical CIA leaked doc to lead us off the trail, and is it bullshit? Or was manufactured stigma created between 1952 and 1969? Actually, Blue Book maybe initially was kind of open to...
What happened in 1952?
The DC UFO sightings in July.
Yeah, I was going to say
Well, what else?
The first H-bomb.
The H-bomb. Teller, yeah.
The Teller-Ulan design.
Yeah.
So the concern that I have is that in 1952, we sent off a signal, just the way when North Korea detonates a nuclear device, it sends seismic waves through the earth. It can't stop sending information outside of the country. I think in 1952, we sent a signal to the cosmos, which is that we're very, very close to being in possession of root-level knowledge, to take a software metaphor.
Root-level knowledge.
We're about to become root, which is terrifying if you're a system administrator, that you've got a hacker that's about to get full control of the system.
It's like your edge.org question, which was what happens when we discover our own source code?
Does something unprecedented happen?
Does something unprecedented happen?
When man finally...
Aliens.
Well, people didn't understand what the question was. That it was the final edge question. And instead of giving an answer, he asked us to give a question. The concern that I have is that in 1952, what if there was someone there to hear what we said in the Pacific? If there was something or someone there to hear us, they probably heard us as saying we're on the verge of being able to come visit. That's terrifying.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And when first of all, Edward Teller is the man who got supposedly Bob Lazar a job at Area 51 on these UAP recovered craft. And but aside from that, Edward Teller created the hydrogen bomb. And in 1952, also there was these UFOs that appeared over the Capitol building. And everybody saw them. There was photos everywhere. Everybody took photos. They're online, and we have just been told nothing about this. But you can see here, there's many, many photos online. But this was one of the photos. And here's another one. And that was in July of 1952. So when was July 1952 hydrogen bomb? When did that happen? The fusion bomb. This was on Bikini Island, I think. 1952. November. So after. Interesting. What's interesting about nuclear power is that it has to do with, like, fission and fusion have to do with entanglement. And especially fusion. It's almost like fusion rewrites like the entanglement path of a particle, because you have to fuse nuclei. So like this is in Sentient Singularity Theory, you have hadrons and then atoms, and basically like these are levels of sentience is like the nucleon level, and then the atom level, the atomic level. And so there's some type of entanglement that happens between in this technology, in both fission and fusion. And as Eric was saying, though, in doing this fusion bomb, at least, he seems to be very focused on this one, not so much the atomic bomb, which was earlier. He thinks we sent off a signal, and I think that this is probably true. And it might not have been only then; it might have been, previously as well. But when you start messing with atomic level tech, you're messing a little bit with entanglement level technology. And as Eric said, basically the message that he thinks we broadcasted out is that we're very close to being able to come and visit you, essentially. And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, or at least we're very close to being equal to you. It's a good way of putting it. And but the thing is that hasn't been the case. Like I said, we have technologically stagnated, and until recently we started to have discussions again that are public that might bring us forward in physics. And I think it's just inescapable at this point. I think the internet has made it. We've just reached the point of the internet where you can't control this conversation anymore. even if you tried and you had way better tech. But I want to show one more clip and talk about it. But he's talking about geometric unity, the implications of geometric unity on this type of technology. And this is something that I really do want to talk about a bit, because this is very interesting. It's about multiple time dimensions.
In one case, you put an extra 6 dimensions as time dimensions into the mix. And so 1 plus 6 is 7. And strong versions of geometric unity. In one case, you put an extra 6 dimensions as time dimensions into the mix. And so 1 plus 6 is 7. And then you've got 4 extra spatial dimensions, 4 plus the 3 spatial dimensions we already know is 7. So you'd have what we would call a split signature metric 7 and 7, 7 times 7 space. And the other way of effectively gluing these extra dimensions is to flip them. So you'd have 4 extra time dimensions. That would be 5 time dimensions in total versus 9 spatial, with 3 that we know plus 6 new ones. In either case, though, you're talking about multiple temporal dimensions. And even physicists rarely talk about multiple temporal dimensions because it completely breaks our paradigm of what we might call Hamiltonian dynamics. The idea that you can take any situation in space and then propagate it through time to get the future. When you have more than one time dimension, you have more than one future. You have no arrow of time. You have a whirlpool of time for the first additional time dimension. Then you have a right-hand rule of time. And so this arrow of time becomes something you call a time orientation. And then the weird, horrible thing about that, if I may use the board.
Yeah, go for it.
When you have more than one temporal dimension, you now have a new possibility that you've never considered, which is you could go back into this extra time dimension and find yourself at an earlier event without ever having to retrace time steps. You wouldn't have to run time backwards. We don't really know how to think about these things very well. They lead to something which is called ultra-hyperbolic equation dimension. And find yourself at an earlier event without ever having to retrace time steps. You wouldn't have to run time backwards. We don't really know how to think about these things very well. They lead to something which is called ultra-hyperbolic equations. And we don't have a ton of focus or skill around these sorts of problems. One of my biggest concerns is that if geometric unity turns out to be true, we don't know what it means to be able to hack extra temporal dimensions. That's a big concern.
I mean, it would probably explain some of this, at least observably faster than speed of light.
Okay, that is really hard to digest, but it's probably the most important thing that he talks about on here. And it has to do with basically that he's saying that you could go back in time, but not rewind time to do it. So, in Sentient Singularity Theory, you get space-time as our view looking out at the universe, where you have 3 dimensions of space, which are different than than length, width, and height. They are really forwards towards a goal, backwards away from your goal, or towards your previous location, and or forwards towards a new location, which is a goal. And then also you have your current location always, which you can't escape, which is your intrinsic constraint. So you have this intrinsic constraint and you have 2 degrees of freedom, positive degree of freedom and negative degree of freedom. And these 3 together are the 3 dimensions in Sentient Singularity Theory's rewiring of like spatial dimensions, which breaks it down. And a dimension in Sentient Singularity Theory is it's either a degree of freedom or a constraint, but it's centered around a conscious agent or a sentient singularity and their goal. So it's not just this random, not random, but this this relativistic length with height type of way of classifying dimensions in space-time from as far as spatial dimensions goes. It's 2 degrees of freedom that have to do with, that are oriented around a goal, and also an intrinsic constraint, which you cannot escape. Then there's this 4th dimension to space-time, which is time, from the perspective of being inside of the universe, looking out. But then from the outside looking in, you get, instead of space-time, you get time-space, okay? And basically an aeon or universe is a time-space, okay? It is a space of time. Basically, it's like when you're looking at it from the outside in, time is more like how far along are you in a set of steps, but those steps are the universe's steps in its evolution or its development. So, and this is kind of similar to how Lee Cronin in Assembly Theory describes time. Is like the memory of the universe, essentially, which I think is exactly correct. But I say that from the outside looking in, you get time spaces. These time spaces would allow, at least potentially, if you could jump between time spaces, like what Penrose's theory supposedly states, is that you can jump between aeons or universes, and that if you jump to a succeeding aeon, maybe you jumped into it in a like a time space that is kind of like it's at a different time. It's at a different point in its time space in its development. So it's like it's kind of like if you were a piece of bacteria. If you're a bacteria, you're a bacterial cell, and you are on an adult human, and you jump off the adult human and you jump onto a baby, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, we went back in time. Look, the universe is like in the past, because it looks like it from its developmental standpoint, because now you're on a baby. But it's really, you're in a different time space, so which is a different it's a different agent at a different point in development. This doesn't seem to be exactly what Eric Weinstein's stating, but it's kind of similar. I think what he's stating, though, is that you could go between time spaces even in our singular aeon or universe or verse, cosmological verse, where basically you could jump out of the process and then jump back into the process in an earlier time space, and you didn't have to rewind anything. You just jumped. It's like you don't have to read a book backwards in order to go to like an earlier part of the book. You just jump out of the book and then go to, instead of being on page 240, now you jump to page like 32. Okay? So you jumped to a different point in time, into a different time space, essentially. And you didn't have to read the book backwards, in reverse. I think that this makes much more sense, actually, with time travel than what most people think. Now, I don't know the implications of it. It's kind of frightening to think about. It might mean that these things they are humans from the future that literally screwed up their genes, and they're jumping back to the past to try purposely to screw up our technology so that we don't destroy the world. I don't know. And I'm not saying that they can stop it, on their own, but, maybe they're part of God's plan of influencing the development. This is kind of a biblical story of Noah, and then God floods the world, and then world restarts, and this time it doesn't get flooded. And this could be basically the case in some way, shape, or form. I'm not saying to know the details of it, but it could be that there was like I said, this could be an ancient civilization on Earth that then, had a cataclysm due to its own technological crazy development of entanglement technologies, and God puts an end to that because you can't have everybody turn cancerous and start breaking all the rules at once, and you can only have a few people. And then their influence of us creates the internet because of our technological suppression, and then therefore, we can create the blockchain messiah. But like this process of some advanced beings influencing us to cause a different path seems inevitable, and it could be ourselves in the future. It's interesting, this show that my wife and I used to watch is called The 4400. It's like early 2000s, I think, like a after school, I think it was like, I don't know, ABC, WB, I don't know what it was, I can't remember. But it was, if you watch it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's very like late 2000s after school type of show. But it's very good, and it's basically, these people get abducted and they're returned with like abilities and to try and change the trajectory of mankind, and they're not abducted by aliens as originally thought. They're abducted by the people in the future. And could be like maybe they're hacking time dimensions and they need to come back to a previous page because they don't like the way that the book ended, and they need to rewrite the book, help rewrite the book at least. It's not them rewriting it, but it's them helping. We're co-writers in the book of life, but we're not the main author, but we are co-writers. And but this idea of jumping back to a previous page, essentially what Eric Weinstein is talking about, makes so much more sense than time travel the way that we think about it because of movies. The way we think about it in movies is you go forwards in time and you go backwards in time, and we know that you can go forwards in time kind of because if you go really fast, then you have time dilation and stuff like that, or if you go close to a black hole, time slows down for you, but it's that's relativistic. So then when you back away from the black hole, kind of like what happens in what is it? I almost said Inception, but it's Interstellar. Then you basically can go forwards in time, but it's really like it's your own perception. But that's all that it is, so that's all that matters. So technically you still went forwards in time. But going backwards is different. And you cannot run time backwards. It doesn't make any sense. It never will make sense. Every time there has been a movie that involves time travel, I almost always hate it because it just creates paradoxes that I just can't stop thinking about, and I just think that it basically renders everything meaningless, essentially, and that drives me crazy. But this doesn't necessarily, this rethinking of time where you're not erasing anything when you do this, where you jump back to a preceding page, you're not running time backwards, so you're not erasing any outcomes. You're taking those outcomes and like re-looping them back in as inputs into the system, and it's different, and it doesn't render everything meaningless, and it doesn't actually create the paradoxes that would be normally made in our current conception of time travel to the past, which literally is nonsensical. But this idea of like flipping to a previous page and kind of like injecting new information, it does seem to change the story going forward, but what if it doesn't completely? What if it changes some things but not all things? Because this is a participatory universe. It's not just an inanimate thing that, cycle that we're within. It's an animated being, and some things might be allowed to be changed and not others, which means that it doesn't just erase all the, actions of the past because you jumped to a previous page and started writing, making changes to the story. It's very difficult to think about because we, like Eric said, we don't have the conceptualization and terminology to even deal with it. All of our time travel to the past is just like rewind. But it's not hitting rewind. You can't rewind. Maybe God can rewind, but if God rewinds, you don't have any memory of it, most likely. But only God could rewind. You can't rewind, but you might be able to jump, off the tape and then jump into a previous frame. But you're not hitting, it's not really rewind. It's different. It's like you. It's relative to you. It's a different thing. It doesn't require you to make a change to the universe as a whole. It's like you are just changing you. And yeah, that change matriculates through the causality of the universe, but it's not you changing the universe due to just your will. It's different. It's you're changing your path. And it might be that if you jump out and then jump back into a previous page, you might be probably are severely limited in your ability to do certain things. I'm not claiming to understand what those limits are, but you would certainly be limited because the will of the universe will be done, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You won't be allowed. Okay, so, and you just don't have the power to overcome that. Your will is not as powerful as the universe's will. Turns out Sasquatch or some quantum advanced dimensional beings are not just a wood ape. With that would be shocking. I told you guys my story about the skinwalker, but what's the other word for it? A Wendigo. A guy saw a Wendigo, and there's a video about it, early on in this channel. It's 15 minutes of me. It's a clip, but I didn't know what it was at the time, and it was 10 years later, almost to the day that I found out what this thing was. I truly do believe I saw that thing, and I don't know where it came from or what it, I can't explain that. So I'm not here to. That's why I'm agnostic about Bigfoot. I have no desire to get into it, but I do think people fake all kinds of stuff. That doesn't mean that there isn't also a real phenomenon. But I saw a Wendigo. It's the scariest moment of my entire life. How is flipping to a previous page and changing things on that page any different from going back in time in the same way you described as nonsensical? Because you have to factor into it the fact that you're interacting with a sentient being that is the universe. So you might be allowed to go to a previous page, change some things that change some aspects of the story, but don't change, everything. And you're not controlling the universe. To go back in time, to rewind time, otherwise it's like, and I understand this is kind of the effect might not seem that different, but it's just the mechanism that matters here. It's not you rewinding time. It's you're jumping out of it and jumping back in. It's so Eric Weinstein talks about this whirlpool of time, and I have this video that is pretty early on in my channel called Space-Time in the Observerse, and I try and explain what I think Eric Weinstein's Observerse is kind of about. But every time I hear him explain it, it changes. So I was judging it based on his explanation to me that I have on video. But So every time he explains it, though, it's slightly different what makes the 14 dimensions. So it's tough to say whether or not I was correct. But I got 14 dimensions basically in my time space map, essentially, and which I don't want to call it an observerse. I'm going to change the name to something else. But I'm not trying to steal any terms from anybody, but I was attempting to try and understand his observerse based on his explanation to me. So I was calling it a model of the observerse, but I don't know if it's accurate. It's accurate, I'm pretty sure, when it comes to describing the dimensions of the cosmos, of space-time and time spaces, but that doesn't mean it's his model. It's accurate to his conceptualization of an observerse, but time-space dimensions. In that video, I have like a whirlpool of time that I show literally fish in a vortex, and I've got all these clips showing this. And as he calls it a whirlpool of time, I show fish in a vortex to show this concept in the past, which is kind of cool to see that he used basically the same terminology to describe time. And we perceive time as like a river flowing by us, but we're really in a vortex. And it's like if you're a guppy in a vortex, you're going to see time going by you in one direction, but it's going like this. So what if you jump out of the vortex and then jump back into the vortex as it's spinning? This could allow you to like hack temporal travel. But I can't explain exactly what the effects of that would be, because I don't know. But I know that your impact would be limited. That is guaranteed. If you can do it, your impact would be limited. That's guaranteed, because the universes will be done. So you're really not. It's so tough to like even think about. It's like almost, I don't know, this is a weird metaphor, but I just thought about it. It's like if you're on a train almost that's going really, really, really fast, like a bullet train. Inside the bullet train, you're traveling inside the bullet train, and you're going from the back to the front of the bullet train, and you're walking forwards. Let's say you climb out the roof of the bullet train, you jump up in the air, and then you land back in like a previous car of the train. That it might not impact what happened. It might not change what happened in the previous, parts of the train, but it might. I mean, who knows? It could make a new train, but I don't know. That's kind of like multiverse, or multiverse, like what is the many worlds theory almost, but it's not exactly like many worlds, because in many worlds every choice you make, I think, makes a new universe or something like that. But it depends on whose definition you're going with. But that's not what this is. It's different. It's like a specific. You're going in a different time space, essentially. But let's imagine each car is like a space and time, or like a frame in a tape. You're like jumping from one frame in the future, which not in the future, in the frame that you're in, to a frame that you were previously in, or that maybe only you can jump to frames that you weren't previously in. Maybe that's why it's not actually like rewinding. It's like you could never run into yourself, because you can only jump to a frame that you didn't exist in previously. And I don't know. In which case, it just kind of like weaves fibers together of these strings of time. And it just makes a more complicated structure. I mean, it's so tough to even think about this stuff, because we're used to one concept of time travel to the past, and it's like rewinding time, or you're jumping to the past and you can see yourself and stuff like that. But I don't think that you'd be able to do that. If you could jump to the past, you'd be severely limited, and it's tough to say exactly how, because that limitation would be due to the universe's like putting constraints on you to make sure that its will be done. And I'm not the universe, so that's why it's so tough. But I would imagine at least one of them would probably be something like you can't jump to a frame that you were already in. It's like maybe you could jump to a time before you existed, but not to a time that you already existed in. And in which case, you know, you can in fact, I don't know, like the entanglement of beings, not yourself. I'm not claiming to understand that. Like, I can't. I don't think we really can right now. It's like the craziest idea ever to think about this type of multi-temporal, of multiple temporal dimensions. Eric Weinstein once said, like, imagine you wanted to meet somebody and you were like, okay, I'm going to meet you on the 5th floor, or it was like 5th and Broadway. This is like your length and your width, and then on the 5th floor of that building on 5th and Broadway, and then you've got your height, and you've got 3 spatial dimensions, but then you would say on the instead of saying at noon, you would say at noon and 5 p.m. And it's like you're giving 2 temporal like coordinates. And I don't know exactly how to think about that yet. I've been trying. And I think that as soon as we do get it, it will be like, it will just click. And from then on, I'll be able to explain it to, anyone. And it'll be like, that seems exceedingly simple. But I just don't think that we've ever tried to think about it like this properly. And I think essentially the way that you would do it is you would have to discretize time, and it would have to do with, making time spaces, essentially. And then defining those as like entanglement states of the universe at that time. And so you might be able to go back to a preceding time space and influence the entanglement states of the universe and that time space, which then, obviously impact the future. But it's not really the future. It's like it's existing in an ever-present always in the universe, essentially. So it's in my model with on my website. It'd be like this. It'd be like of jumping to like 4 p.m. the previous day. You'd be jumping from like here to maybe here. Okay, it's in the entanglement, state of the universe. So you might not actually you might be able to change the entanglement state back here, which would then change what's going on up here, but it doesn't erase it. Okay? It would be like what has already been done has to be in, jive with what you are changing. But you couldn't just erase the past or the present by traveling to the past. It's like you would influence the present, but you couldn't erase it because it actually happened. And but the thing is that the constraints of what you could change is, like I said, not due to our own will necessarily. It would be due to what we're allowed to change. What can the universe afford to let us change? It's very tough to talk about right now, like I said, but you couldn't erase you're not erasing anything. That's what's so weird. It's like in all of our movies, if somebody jumps to the past and I don't know, somebody dies and in like Avengers, and they jump to the past and then they actually kill Thanos or something, and then all of a sudden nobody leaves and gets, snapped into ether. But that's not how it would be. It would be like you could change some things, but you couldn't change what happened. What's already happened has happened. But you could influence the entanglement relationship somehow to change, to make new outcomes almost. Not to like change outcomes, but to like make new ones. And understanding that is just like, it's tough. And I'm not claiming to fully get it. I don't. But I do kind of understand like the way you need to think about this, I think, in order to start to get it. But I'm very early in this still. And I think, because I think that there's like a congruent concepts that you have to understand simultaneously to like build the picture that would allow you to see how this transpires. So you have to understand entanglement, you have to understand assembly theories, version of the universe and its memory and time, and then you also have to understand like time as a vortex and how to jump out of it and jump back into it, and like it's very tough. Like there's multiple things that we have to understand, and nobody, I don't think, understands all of them yet. But I think that looking at geometric unity and looking at assembly theory and looking at sentient singularity theory, when you combine the idea that we're inside of a sentient being who makes choices dependent upon our choices and whose will cannot be outdone, by our will, and that concept from sentient singularity theory, and then this assembly process from assembly theory and also sentient singularity theory that is of entanglement states and the memory of the universe being really like the discretization of time kind of, and then the geometric unities, multi-temporal dimensions coming into play of how you maneuver between, time spaces. Like you need to understand all of these to be like, oh, I get it, and I think there's got to be one missing as well. And I think those would be the three of them, and there's probably one more at least. That's like a key idea that you need to understand, or key concept to make this work. And but I don't think that you can erase causality. Like you can't change the past, because it's not really the past. It's like it's always you're always in the present. So the universe is always in its present moment, its present state, and you of its entanglement and creation, and you are always in your present moment, and there is no future and there is no past outside of everybody's perception. So like that's tough to think about. You're not really jumping to the past. It's not the past. It's like a preceding state, or an earlier state. But it's not the past. There is no going to the past. It doesn't exist. And there is no going to the future. Really. Like, it's just your present always. So there's no instance in which you end up in the future. You could perceive like, you travel through time faster than others, but like you don't actually end up in the future. It's your present, and it's the present of everybody who's there. Whose future is it? The people in the past, the past doesn't exist. So like this is why it's so tough. It's because like we need to start thinking about everything as an ever present, and think about things in terms of states. not like future and past. Future and past are memories and predictions. That's it. I know this is unrelated, Tyler, but do you think Canada is going to survive the Great Reset? I'm 22 Canadian, desperate and fed up with being the only man left. I don't know, man. Your leader is horrible. But so is ours. Canada is not going to survive much longer, and neither is the United States. That's my theory. But you can, so like, don't feel desperate because... Don't feel desperate. You shouldn't be desperate. There's always something you can do to improve your future and the future of someone else who, like, you want to help. Don't feel desperate. You know, people are like, what are we going to do if the United States falls? Rome fell. People survived. It's okay. You know, like, the United States is crumbling, and, you know, be there for the next step afterwards. Same thing with Canada. Like, Canada might even last longer than the United States. But that's just because it doesn't matter as much. I'm not saying Canadians don't matter as much. I'm saying, like, the empire, there's no Canadian empire. Like, but your leader sucks. Trudeau is horrible. I cannot stand that guy. He's probably my least favorite politician in the world. But there's no reason to be desperate. You're not desperate. If you're on here talking to me, you're not desperate. But I understand the feeling. It's tough. It seems like everything's crumbling, but that means that you're paying attention to the wrong things. Go build something. Go find a girl, get married, start a family, and, you know, start learning to grow food and chickens and building the things that you want to build with, you know, your partner, and, like, that's what you should focus on. And then things won't seem like they're crumbling, because you'll look around and you'll be like, wow, I built this house and this family. If you're just looking at Canadian, you know, government, then of course you're going to feel like everything's crumbling. Same thing if you're United States, in the US. Look at the US government, and if all you did was look at that and to gauge whether or not, you know, the progress of your life, you would be like, my life is falling apart. But it's not your life. And that's a good thing, because you could be much more competent than Biden or Trudeau. So you can mess up the story if you want, but that's actually what actually happened won't change, even if you change the record of it. I don't think you can mess up the story. I think you can affect the story, but I don't think you can mess it up. But changing the record of the story doesn't actually change what happened. What happened happened. The story is just retelling of what actually happened. Yes. You could go back and change the record of what happened, but you couldn't actually change what happened. And just changing the record of what happened would not affect what happened on the next page. It would change. It could. But it wouldn't change what happened on pages that have already been read. It would change what happens on pages that are currently being read. Potentially. So, that's kind of my thoughts on that. Is like, you can change what's happening, but by traveling to, like, a previous time space, like, or previous chapter, you couldn't change what happened, but you could change what's happening, maybe, by your travel to a previous time space. And it's tough. It's very tough. All right. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover from that stream. I have some very good streams planned, but this one was just kind of, I thought it was important because it starts talking about multi-temporal dimensions, and also the idea that we're being messed with. Our technology and physics knowledge is being messed with, and it does seem to be the case to me. I mean, this is like where we should be, and we're not. Instead, we're like here. There you go. Interesting. It's a good model. Anyways. All right, any final questions? Like I said, please hit the like button, share this. I realize I screwed up and typed Area 15 in the beginning of the video, but still, I do think that they're still suppressing us looking at things. And when I say "they're," I don't know who that is. I have no idea. But someone, I mean, it's multiple people, but they're messing with what we know about physics and technology in the world, and it could be these beings, and I think at least partially it is, and it's also partially Google and tech companies, and it's also partially the government, and who knows if they're working together or working against each other, and it's just kind of like appearing, we just get to see, all of it manifest. But on a lighter note, I do highly recommend going and seeing Top Gun. Like I said, it was very good, and it was very interesting to just see, like, people have speculated that Aurora type of plane, the Dark Star, hypersonic plane that they're testing at Area 51 in the beginning of the movie, has existed in the 90s, and it's like, is this part of the declassifying of that? But why are they saying that the SR-72 won't be operational till the till the 2030s? It's like we had things that were going Mach 6 apparently in like that were manned in the 1990s. At least it appears that way from seismometer data. And so if they can classify hypersonic technology and postpone it and for 30 years, which by 2030 will be 40 years, then maybe they could do that with anti-gravity stuff too, which would be like from the 70s, be like 50, 60 years. I mean, it appears like they covered up Roswell crash. So, which isn't covering up physics. It's covering up physics, what will lead to physics developments, potentially, wreckage that you could examine and knowledge of something there that, to look for. But still, like, I mean, this is just the craziest story, because as physics is about to get into its final form, the entanglement, with understanding entanglement, then it's like it appears that technology related to this has been classified for the last like almost 100 years. It's the biggest scientific discovery in the world, and it was covered up. And it appears, at least, and then the biggest technological development, if they figured out anti-gravity, be like the biggest technological development ever. And they covered it up if they actually discovered it. But what's weird is that now we've reached this point where the internet, it means you can't really stop these discussions, and physics has gotten to a point where our interaction with tech and has allowed us metaphors that kind of allow us to explain what's happening in the universe, like simulation hypothesis, or it's like a video game, or it's like these concepts allow us to start having discussions that we couldn't otherwise have very easily. But it's just interesting to see everything come out. And it will be interesting to see everything come out by accident or, by design. And it's just wild. I mean, it's just so wild. Where we're at with science is we are standing on the precipice of this. Which what I expect is this. What if it's like this? Hmm. If it's kind of like that. We're going to go back. It's kind of like we jumped out of the book and then we're jumping back into the book. But now we have blockchain story and internet story in the book, which wasn't otherwise in the book. But like entanglement happened, but like not going to not get it. You're just going to add in other stories. It's almost like you can, it's like you can jump. It's almost like you have like this story set and it's like canon, and you can you can't change what happened in episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but you can jump in and write a story between episode 2 and 3 and add to it. And maybe that's how it is with this temporal dimension hacking. Essentially, it's like can't really change the main episodes, but you can write these little stories in between that do, I guess, add. They don't really change, or they don't eliminate. Even if they do change, they don't eliminate what has previously happened or what will inevitably happen because of choice on the part of God or the universe. It's just fascinating. I had one more thing that I did want to say, but I forgot what it was. But let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Anyways, hit the like button, guys, and I will be in the Discord call on Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. If you'd like to join our Discord discussion and have a live call, send me a private message on Instagram, either Theory of Everyone or Tyler Goldstein, and I will send you the link to the Discord, and you can join our live Discord call on Thursdays. We do it every Thursday. It's always a good time, and we discuss all kinds of things. It's an open conversation always. It goes from 7 p.m. to midnight Pacific time, and then I have a lot of content coming up, and got some podcast appearances that are in the works as well to discuss some of this stuff. But it's a weird time to be in. It's very cool to see. But anyways, with that, thank you everybody who joined. Please, like I said, hit the like button and share this video. Comment down below any thoughts you have, suggestions, whether you hated it or loved it. And with that, I will see you next week or on Thursday. Peace.